Nintendo, possibly one of the greatest video game companies of all time. Nintendo has always experienced success when it came to creating new games consoles. One such console, of which I'll be reviewing, is proof that Nintendo is a successful console company. It is time to take a trip to the year 1996. Whoops, a little too far. That's not even a Nintendo console. That's more like it. In the 90s, the video game business was booming. There was a war between Nintendo and Sega with their respective Super Nintendo and Sega Genesis. This was a time where game companies advertised their consoles' bit power. What are bits exactly? A bit is typically a unit of information. When it comes to video games, more bits equals better visuals and sound. You could say that the first video game console, the Magnavox Odyssey, was a 1-bit console, though I wouldn't think it would matter, because people did not start giving a hoot about bits until the mid-80s when the NES came out. This is what started the bit wars, which is mainly associated with the competition between Nintendo and Sega. With each new console generation, the bit power doubles, 16-bit, 32-bit, and so on. Nintendo and Sega were still going at it right up to the end of the 16-bit era. Sega decided to increase the bit power to 32-bit with a console add-on, but it failed miserably. Nintendo kept going strong as Sega failed, but in 1994, the Sony PlayStation was released, and it blew people away. The first 64-bit console to be released was the Atari Jaguar, but that is debatable, because it is more of a hybrid of 32-bit processors. The Jaguar failed. Sega had released their own 32-bit console, the Sega Saturn, but people were not entirely impressed. The only major company to not make a move so far was Nintendo. Eventually, Nintendo made an announcement that a true 64-bit console was in development. The console had the working name of Project Reality. The console was to become a reality in 1995, but was delayed for a 1996 release, where the name eventually was changed to the Nintendo 64. This will be the console I'll be reviewing in today's video. Taking a look at this console just gives any gamer an overflow of nostalgia. The console's very nice looking, and the size of it is not too big, yet not too small. A great console indeed. Taking a look at the top of the console, we'll first see the Nintendo logo. Then we'll see the cartridge slot, which has a dust cover door just to keep the dust out of it. And then we have this nice little vent here. And then we see two buttons, the power button and the reset button. Flipping the power switch on will cause the console to turn on, and that can be indicated by the red light. If you have a game inserted while the console's turned on, you'll see your game appearing on the TV. The reset button does what its name implies. During gameplay, you can push the reset button at any time. This is basically like turning the power button off and on very quickly. The game must be broken or something. Let's reset and try again. You'll notice in between both the power button and the reset button, there's this cover that says memory expansion on it. When you open it, you'll see one of two things. You will either see this or this. Here is the Nintendo 64 jumper pack. This is what was inside the memory expansion slot when the console was first released. It serves no purpose except to make games work at the time. As the console got older, Nintendo released the expansion pack, replacing the jumper pack. Certain games like Star Wars Episode 1 Racer required the expansion pack to be inserted. Now, this is what you'll mostly find inside the console if you buy it secondhand, but of course if you buy it secondhand there's always the third chance when you'll find nothing. To the front of the console you'll see 4 controller ports. Now, consoles back then typically only had the 2 controller ports, and that's always been the case since the Magnavox Odyssey. And now, the PlayStation had 2 controller ports, and it was supposedly superior. It had a disc format and all that. But this had 4 controller ports, and it was a big deal because PlayStation didn't have that. And now I know it had a multi-tap accessory, and even the PlayStation 2 had that. But this is the first console that has 4 built-in controller ports. In the front center here, we see the ever so popular Nintendo 64 logo. On the sides here, you'll see these round protruding feet, which you think would have rubber on the bottom, but in fact, they're just hard plastic. But we have small little rubber feet, which do all the work, and they're really useful in case you have pets and they run across the wires and pull your console off. This will stop them. What do you want? I already took you outside. Okay, just because I said outside doesn't mean you need to go. Watch out! These rubber feet are crap. On the back of the console, you'll see the Nintendo number right here, and plugins for our video and power supply. So this power supply, it's huge. And if you don't see already, this is the only part that connects. Everything else is just extraneous. It's huge. I mean, why couldn't they just, like, see, they could just made it this. Not this, this. And look at when it plugs into the console here. It's huge. The bottom of the console shows nothing special. What's this? EXT? Some game slot of some sort. Let's try to put a game in it. No? I guess not. Well, the answer is this. Nintendo decided to release a peripheral called the 64DD, or disk drive, which used magnetic disks and gave the console internet capability. The 64DD would have been released worldwide, but it failed miserably, making it a Japan exclusive. So itself, let's look at the controller. Now, when you see the controller, it has a very unique design. It has an M shape to it, you know? And it looks like you need 3 hands to use it. But no, 2 hands. On the front of the controller, you'll notice the Nintendo logo. You got your L button, your R button, a D-pad, 4 yellow C buttons, a B button, an A button, a start button, and an 8-way analog stick. This was a big deal in the gaming industry at the time because no other console had it. It definitely makes moving in a 3D environment much easier instead of using a D-pad, which was what the PlayStation used for a couple years. One downside to the analog stick is that it's really stiff. It just feels stiff. And it has no grip at all. My thumb just slides off. And that's how this controller is. It has not aged well in terms of functionality. It functions well, it just doesn't, like, the buttons feel soft to push. When you push down, they just don't have a nice push to them. But it's a great controller overall. On the back side, you got your slot here. I call it the slot because not only is it a memory card slot, but it also can fit a rumble pack and a transfer pack, but I don't have a transfer pack. For example, this rumble pack will just slide in right here, and when you're playing game, it will rumble. This memory card will just slide right in and do what it needs to do. Now you'll notice this Z trigger button, and it's pretty unique, and it works well with shooters like GoldenEye, Perfect Dark, Doom, and so on. Now, this portion here of the controller kind of reminds me of something. Notice how this portion of the Nintendo 64 controller resembles the nunchuck, or the nunchuck resembles the controller. You got your Z button on the Nintendo 64, your Z button on the nunchuck, and your analog sticks. And if you think about it, putting the classic controller Pro just looks like a Nintendo 64 controller. Now, this controller is a really fun controller, and it just adds to the nostalgic factor that this console already has. Now, the console and the controller are famous for color variations, and as you see here, I have the dark gray, almost black console and a light gray controller. The consoles themselves have been released in jungle green, red, blue, orange, atomic purple, limited edition gold, and even several Pokemon editions. The controllers themselves have also appeared in several different colors, including red, yellow, green, blue, atomic purple, limited edition gold, and many more. So I got the game here, GoldenEye 007. All Nintendo 64 games have the same cartridge shape, rounded on the top, flat edges right here, and flat bottom. On the cartridge itself, you typically have your game label on the front. On the back, you have a caution label advising you what not to do with the game, and the Nintendo logo. Now, one thing I never really liked about the cartridges themselves is the lack of an end label. Now, some people decide to make their own end labels with permanent marker, and now I know they have some end labels on sale, but they weren't officially released by Nintendo. And it makes it really hard while looking through a game library and you can't find a Nintendo 64 game to fulfill your needs. The N64 went on to sell more than 32 million units. The console did better than Sega Saturn, but could not defeat the Sony PlayStation in terms of sales. The console was later discontinued in 2002 as the newest Nintendo console, the GameCube, was being released. In conclusion, this console is just great. It just defines greatness in video games, despite its minor flaws. It's one of the greatest consoles of all time, and one of the most well-known. And tell me, because I know I've seen that logo. And if you haven't lived. And there's just truly impressive titles for this console, like Super Mario 64 and GoldenEye. Now, if you're looking to buy a Nintendo 64 console, expect to pay $40. That's how much I got mine, and I assume that's probably the lowest of low for a console. And depending on the seller, controller may or may not come with the console, and expect at least $15 at least, including memory card and such. Games, depending on the games, you can get anywhere from $2 to maybe even $50. It just depends on the game. And I know there's some rare games for the console, but on average, $2 to maybe $50 at least. Well, I hope you liked this video, and I hope you learned something from this, and I hope you liked the video.